This has become a common sight. Since June, over 10 markets and food centres across the island were forced to close for disinfection.
This is the first time closures are happening on such a scale in Singapore in recent years. In this episode, I want to find out what makes markets and food centres COVID-19 hotspots and the full impact of their closures on stall holders and us.
The first market that was shuttered was the Bukit Merah View Market and Hawker Centre back in June. Stall holders were finally allowed back at work after 2 weeks, but fewer than 10 stalls were open, and visitors were far and few between.
我们早上3点半下来清理这东西，关2个礼拜嘛，东西不会开住很糟嘛，要丢掉了，搬丢掉烂掉啊，这样看，还要洗一下臭味的东西。
Worry about the store, come back and clean all the rubbish. It may spread another virus. All the germs around.
很多熟客打电话跟我说，哇，我们不敢来啊，暂时不敢来啊，要等这个时期。我讲好了，我们也是不大敢开啊，等你们一起才来啊。
In early June, COVID-19 quietly infiltrated the Bukit Merah View Market and Hawker Centre. In almost no time at all, it became the centre of what was then Singapore's largest active COVID-19 cluster. I've asked Professor Teo Yik Ying to meet me at Bukit Merah. He's been actively monitoring Singapore's COVID-19 situation.
There are always a few popular stalls, and that's where people would tend to crowd and queue for the food. That's when people will be stagnant. They may be chatting with people around them. Also, in a public place like this, it's very common for people to be going to the toilet, washing their hands, but in the process of it, coughing, sneezing, or even blowing their nose. And this is when they project a lot of their droplets onto the basins, the taps, and it's very easy for people to come in contact with these contaminated surfaces. So clearly, queues, public facilities like toilets, and even the tendency for people to linger. These are all the opportunities for the coronavirus to spread. The reality is that this is a place that the elderly come for their social activities, and we look at the way that some of the elderly wear their mask. There is bound to be slippages, and for many of the elderly, they actually would prefer to be mingling with their friends without the mask on. And this is something that we can see around here. It's quite common. Now we are dealing with a much more transmissible variant as well. The Delta variant, unfortunately, it's very much more transmissible than the wild-type variant that the world saw in the early parts of 2020.
Mutations in the Delta variant allows it to bind better to your body cells, thus infecting more cells. These infected cells also carry a higher viral load. What this essentially means is that with the original COVID-19 strain, every time you cough or sneeze, you might expel 1 million viral particles compared to 10 million if you are infected with the Delta strain. This increases the chances of airborne transmission. Another big difference? A shorter incubation period of 1 to 2 days for the Delta strain compared to the original COVID-19 strain of 5 to 10 days. This means a person with the more infectious Delta variant can possibly infect hundreds of people before a person who has the original strain even passes their virus on.
So the problem right now is in a transition phase that Singapore is experiencing because quite a number of the people are being vaccinated. And what that means is that if I'm vaccinated and I'm infected, I may not have any symptoms. chances are you wake up, you don't even feel that I'm infected. I go out, I go to work, I go buy my breakfast. That's exactly when we create gaps for the coronavirus to spread.
So it's a possibility that as Singapore gradually opens up, things might get worse before they get better.
As Singapore relaxes our restrictions, we will start to see more people get infected. But because most of the people in Singapore have been vaccinated, the infection numbers will not translate to higher number of people needing hospital care or hospital resources. That's what the data has been telling us very clearly.
As infection numbers rise, seniors who have not been vaccinated are urged to stay home. And as I'm realizing, this is even more important as they also have a tendency to not mask up properly. But you could be doing everything right and still get infected, as I would soon learn from a 74-year-old who was the first reported case in Bukit Merah.
别人传到我也不知道他是怎么传的，变成我第一个。
About 177,000 seniors above the age of 60 in Singapore were not yet vaccinated at the end of July. And if we look at COVID-19 cases linked to the Bukit Merah View Market and Hawker Centre in June, seniors above the age of 60 make up almost half of the cases. "74-year-old Go Lai Kim is one of them. He owns a clothing store at the market. But you might also know him as case 64132, the first reported case of the Bukit Merah cluster. I want to know how the virus affected him.
6月8号，我早上来开档，我的身体还是很好，大概12点多这样，就开始为什么会流一点点鼻水，然后那个喉咙又有一点干这样，然后我就收档去看家庭医生，家庭医生就跟我验了鼻子，他说安哥你可能是中这个毒株嘞，第二天就送我去亚历山大医院。 每天都是好好的，没有事情的，36多、37、36。
Are you vaccinated?
政府给我打了2支针，4月，好在这2支针是保护我，所以我很快就恢复正常了。
What do you want to say to seniors who do not want to be vaccinated?
又免费又为你的身体健康，为什么不要去打呢？现在我说，现在有人还没有打针。 的人啊，应该尽快的去打。
Was there anything that you were particularly worried about?
你要开档，政府也有叫他们的人员来监督你，看你有没有消毒药全部擦，他站在外面看你，你才可以，他才可以给你开档。这个红山井大牌115，以前更清洁100倍了。
As of 10 August, 43 people are seriously ill from COVID-19. 35 of them are seniors above 60 years old. Most are not fully vaccinated. I wonder what it'll take to encourage more of our seniors to get inoculated. So I've arranged to meet Joan Pereira. A member of parliament, she oversees the Henderson-Dawson division, which includes Bukit Merah View, and has been actively pushing the elderly in her ward to get vaccinated. Did you come across elderly residents who were not yet vaccinated or who refused to?
Yes, I have come across seniors who, for various reasons, do not feel comfortable with the vaccination. Many of them fear the side effects. That is why they do not want to get vaccinated, because they do hear that they will get fever, soreness, and they are worried that they are not able to take these symptoms.
How did you convince them?
I always assure them these are normal. and it just takes 1 or 2 days for symptoms to subside. And sometimes we talk to them, they still feel that it's the government official talking to them. So we will also get their fellow neighbours to encourage them and their family members. Seniors with mobility challenges, we will help with transport arrangement to bring them to the vaccination sites. So we try to get as many people, especially our elderly, vaccinated. We really need to bring the numbers higher. Hello, Uncle. 你好. Take care. Ah.
It's impossible to detect every single COVID-19 case, especially when some don't show any symptoms. So there might be reservoirs of undetected infections in the community, and this is something we're seeing across Singapore.
One possible way to get ahead of the virus is wastewater testing. This is essentially testing water that comes out of our sewers for fragments of the COVID-19 virus. To learn how effective wastewater sampling is, I'm suiting up with Dr. Judith Wong.
Wow, that is a lot of gear. So what is wastewater sampling? Is this water from our toilets?
It's not just water from the toilet. It includes like washings from the kitchen, used water from the entire households. These end up in our sewers. This sampling point receives wastewaters from the entire block. Our team right now is deploying a strainer and a tube into the manhole. So this is an auto sampler which helps us to draw wastewaters.
So how much water do you typically collect?
We collect about 1 to 2 litres per sampling point in total because the virus concentration in wastewaters can be quite low.
After collecting this wastewater sample, how long will we know whether someone in this block is infectious?
So by the time the sample reaches the lab, the entire testing process takes about a day. So this then tells us that there may be infected persons, but we will need to do clinical testings and swab operations in order to identify the cases.
At the lab, staff will concentrate the samples and remove compounds that can interfere with the testing, such as soap and other household chemicals.
We are now actively monitoring 200 oversights in Singapore, and we plan to double this number to 400 by next year. So these sites will include areas for wide area surveillance and monitoring, as well as high-density living areas, and also areas at risk of COVID-19 transmission.
Wastewater testing can be deployed at affected markets or where many unvaccinated seniors live to weed out hidden cases in the community. But as I'm about to find out, tightened restrictions and market closures are not just affecting the stall holders, it's also having a huge impact on us.
Dr. Ghosh, how will the recent closure of markets affect the prices of food?
The recent spike in COVID-19 cases linked to Jurong Fishery Port has affected all of Singapore's markets and hawker centres. Stricter controls are in place to ensure that all visitors check in. This will help with contact tracing should clusters pop up again. Jurong Fishery Port is where most fishmongers in Singapore buy their stock. It's also where foreign fishing boats land their catch, and where the COVID-19 virus that led to the recent spread of cluster infections across markets in Singapore is suspected to have docked. Infections at the Jurong Fishery Port has led some to wonder if our fish is safe to eat. To find out if COVID-19 can spread through contaminated fish, I'm meeting Professor Dale Fisher. He's been studying COVID-19 transmission in different settings.
How likely is it that the virus can spread via fish?
What we're talking about is really surface contamination. So you can imagine if you've got a little bit of virus on the fish, for instance, if there's enough on your fingers and then you touch your eyes or your mouth and it gets in that way, the theory is that if someone's got COVID and they've contaminated the surface of the fish or other seafood, then because it's on ice and it's kept cold, the virus can survive. The COVID virus actually is very sensitive to heat. So at room temperature, it might survive a couple of days. At 4 degrees, which is refrigeration temperature, or maybe -20, which is freezer temperature, it's going to survive easily for weeks, I would imagine. It's certainly possible, but it's not the most likely way COVID spreads compared to conventional coughing.
So, if there is COVID-19 virus present on the surface of a chilled fish, it can theoretically survive for at least a week. But as I'm beginning to understand, there is little to worry about.
So should people be wary of buying fish or other seafood items?
So firstly, you shouldn't be worried about the quality of food, especially in Singapore. When it comes to surface transmission, one of the reasons is that it's very unlikely is because of this dilutional effect. We go from a boat to some crates in the marketplace, and then it has to be moved and people are touching it, and then it gets trucked to the wet market, and every time it just gets more and more diluted. So the consumer is actually quite safe. If you're worried, wash your hands. And in fact, we ask people to wash their hands during food preparation, even before COVID. It's basic hygiene. COVID is very sensitive to heat, so obviously any virus on food is going to be killed as soon as it's cooked.
The chances of getting infected via the food we handle and consume are low, so there's really no need to worry. But the temporary closure at Jurong Fishery Port has affected supplies of fish and led to the closure of several markets and food centres.
Which leaves me one last thing to investigate. If the recent closures will affect overall food prices. I'm getting some answers from Professor Aurobindo Ghosh. He's been keeping a close watch on how the pandemic has been affecting the prices of goods.
Dr. Ghosh, how will the recent closure of markets affect the prices of food?
So you expect prices might go up in the short term. So market closures will have short-term effects. If a market closes, then the suppliers might have the food available, but they might not be able to get it to the store owners. So that might cause a disruption in the process. And when the stalls reopen, they would not have the supplies available. Things which are difficult to store are the more likely ones that might be impacted. The price of fish after the fishery closure, has it gone up?
Yeah, gone up, yeah. By kg lah.
So I just heard him say that prices have increased.
$5 across the board is a pretty big amount.
How likely is it that stallholders affected by the market closures might increase their prices to make up for their losses incurred during this period?
Obviously, when the consumers are not able to go to wet markets, they are getting sourced food and fresh fruit and vegetables from elsewhere. Could be online purchase or supermarkets. People might not come back right away, and that might have an impact. So the stall owners are aware of it. They might absorb part of the cost, not the full cost, because they still have to run a business. Their costs might actually increase because of safe management measures and cleanliness.
How long do you expect prices to remain at this level?
Prices of fish have been increasing because of the closures of Jurong Fishery Port. But of course, when Jurong Fishery Port reopen, prices might come down. So most of the stall owners have to find out a way of bringing customers back to wet markets. People might not come back right away because there's a fear that they might actually get infected somehow.
Dr. Ghosh is right about some people being afraid to come back to the markets as soon as they reopen for business. I was back at the Bukit Merah View Market and Hawker Centre 2 weeks after it reopened in July and found many stallholders struggling. The marketplace was, at one point, Singapore's largest active COVID-19 cluster.
Hello, Auntie. 2 weeks ago, you said some of your regulars were too scared to come back. So have they been coming back now?
有一些熟客哦，他们都陆续有回来了啊，因为我们有跟他们解释说，现在我们这里是最好、最安全的啊，已经消毒了。有些隔离出来，他们讲我怕回来，等一下又再隔离啊，他们很怕。
Hari itu ada, saya ini tutup, saya pergi ready sekejap Oni dan saya balik sini lagi. Scared, tapi saya pakai mask. Saya nanti balik, saya cuci tangan semua.
进来少了，好像是来10箱，现在来了7箱这样啦。
But as my time in Bukit Merah can attest, stall owners across Singapore need not worry.
My regular customer, they really support me. Some are not at this area. They far away from Udon, Jurong, Punggol, Sengkang.
I prefer the veggie here. I come every Sunday. Cheap as well. I'm vaccinated already.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Secondly, they already clean. So why scared?
First of all, definitely it's safe, it's clean, and people have been, tested. Right, and second, it's really local, good food.
I've discovered that the more transmissible Delta variant, coupled with seniors who do not wear their masks properly and intermingling, are key reasons why markets and food centres are COVID-19 hotspots. The recent market closures have also impacted the livelihoods of many stall owners and might lead to a short-term increase in food prices. So, if we want to avoid these closures, we have to take safe distancing measures seriously, wear your masks properly, and get vaccinated.